parts of the world, in this case, are really, really important. And I think that that part about the Just City, about being connected, is so true for all of us. So I appreciate all of the work that's gone into this day, and hopefully I can add value to it. All right, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the data that shows the differences between what's going on the two sides of MLK. And I know you'll see it's actually the multifaceted sides of MLK, all the neighborhoods around it, and put Pigtown into some broader context of where we are right now. So I probably don't need to preach to the choir in this room, but even if you don't know anything about planning, which is typically what the kind of context that I'm talking in, this idea that the place that we live, the place that we work, affects who we become as people. I think for all of us in the room, we probably understand that, but it's not so obvious to communities and people that the place that they're in has some agency towards what actually happens in their lives. So I always show this slide about planting, because hopefully, even if you're not a planner, maybe you know something about gardening and ecology, that if you wanted to deal with the yellow leaves that are in these seedlings, something's clearly wrong. The answer to these yellow leaves problems is not in the leaf. Right? It's in the soil, it's in the air, it's in the ambiance that this plant is in. So we know this when we go to gardening, right? We know that if we see a distress, in gardening you don't go to the place of distress. You try and figure out the context that distress is even happening to begin with, right? Because that's the root cause. And that's what my project at the University of Baltimore aims to do, is really help people understand the place that they're in represents so much more than just where they hang their hat. This is a body of literature, of course, that comes from urban sociology and other kind of academic literature for those that are planners and architects and may want to read a little bit more about urban archaeology and urban sociology. To really think about what does it mean to be a neighborhood, which obviously some of your students have certainly alluded to what they heard when they were here. But let's really put down your address and everything your address here in the United States gives you, right? It's way more than your hang your hat. Your address determines who your neighborhoods are, right? Most of us don't get to choose our neighbors. It determines how your neighborhood is organized, if it's organized. It determines your services, right? Your address determines your catchment area for your school. Your address determines your political representation, whether you voted for them or not. No offense to the elected officials in the room. It means something to live in a city and in a neighborhood like Pigtown. There's identity, there's history associated with that address. It's not just one address on the planet. It's addressed specifically in this place. We know now more and more that your zip code affects your health outcomes, unfortunately, given kind of the context that we live in. The thing that I think need to educate our planning and architectural students a little bit more about is how much your address determines your market. The two main markets that we care about for neighborhoods are housing market and your retail market. And for those of you that are on the main streets, you probably understand this, right? The fact that you can sell your house has far more to do with the context that it's located in, all those other services that your house provides, than whether or not you put in the granite countertop, right? Not to say that you shouldn't put in the granite countertop. And then, of course, whether you have retail opportunities in your neighborhood has far more to do with the aggregate demand that your neighborhood represents, not just you alone, right? The grocery store is there because they think the probability of how many of you around there are going to shop on their site every day. So really thinking about, this is all wrapped up in where we live. So that's the kind of data that we want to try and show and track over time. Because it's not just about building it, it's about maintaining it, it's about using it, it's about continuously sustaining it into the future. So, this is what we do at the Baltimore Neighborhood Indicator Science. We create essentially a suite of community-based indicators that we track over time. It doesn't help me or help you if the data is only available today. You want to know how things are changing over time. How's your neighborhood changing? Because inevitably your neighborhood is going to change. Every neighborhood is going to change. You might not even be there, but your neighborhood is still going to change, right? So how do you keep track of those things? The same way you go to the doctor's office and you get your vital statistics, maybe 90% of it is in range and you're doing fine. It's the few things that are out of range that you want to keep track of, and they will change as neighborhood ages. So that's what we do. The Baltimore Neighborhood Indicators Alliance is a peer network learning group. We have 30 other cities around the country. If you're interested in this topic for other cities, neighborhoodindicators.org. We are essentially the Baltimore partner site, and we're located at the University of Baltimore. We collect all kinds of data, and believe it or not, these data are all about acquiring relationships with how our city functions. If we want to get data from any one of our city agencies to be put out as community-based indicators, we have to know why that particular agency is even collecting it. And that is a relationship that we each have with our government, right? If you're calling 311, that's a relationship that you're having with your government, and that moment that you called is a data point that we're basically capturing in the data. So even if folks may not think that they're numbers people, every single one of the data points in our data sets is a human interaction with our government. There's a human story literally behind every data set. Somebody had a baby, somebody called 911, and a crime incident occurred. And that's the way to think about the kind of data that we collect. We put out the vital signs report. Hopefully you've had a chance to look at it at this scale. These are 55 communities, and obviously I'm going to focus in zooming in on this downtown area. And for better or worse, we have a division even in the way we collect our data, which is the MLK Boulevard. These are based off of census tracts, so you can imagine why census tracts don't cross over the MLK Boulevard, and so our data sets don't either. It's basically 2 or 3 census tracts put together to create a community, and these have been in Baltimore since 2000. The nice thing about it is that we can have these kind of tracking of data over time. So we've been doing this now for 20 years, believe it or not. What have we learned from doing this for 20 years? It's essentially like putting a stethoscope on every single one of our neighborhoods for 20 years, and learning and listening and trying to follow the neighborhoods through their data. I'm going to tell you about a billion different indicators, but I'll tell you there's one thing that matters most. Are people moving into your neighborhood, or are people moving out? Population decline in Baltimore is our biggest problem, and this is not insurmountable, right? We used to be just like all these other cities, right? DC was a crime capital of the world. New York City was going bankrupt in the 1970s, for those of us that might remember that. All of those other East Coast cities have turned themselves around since 2000. We are the only East Coast city to continue to lose population. We are bucking our own sister trend by continuing to lose population, and we have got to focus on that. Now, the population loss as a city did not occur evenly, right? We have some neighborhoods that grew and some neighborhoods that didn't. And you can see MLK becomes one of those major division lines. I don't have to tell you anything else about this part of town, but the east part of town grew between 2000 and 2010, and the west part did. And everything that might mean to you, right? Losing population means all of those things that I mentioned about what a neighborhood represents. Losing population means that you actually lose all those things. So the green are the areas. Sorry,
is it 2%?
The green is 2% or greater growth, and the red is 2% or greater decline. So right across the street from each other, we have a 4-point swing at least, and I'm going to show you that it's actually a little bit more than that. But so, well, how can it be? I mean, this is something that I think we all struggle with. How can it be that one side of the street is growing and the other side is not? There is more to it than just who's living there. There's way more to it than just who's living there, and it has a lot to do with the things that you're talking about, design, structure, things like that. So what does the data tell us about this? The thing about this one indicator, whether or not you're growing or declining, is that I can describe all the other things that that community probably cares about, just by telling you that one thing. If you're growing, you have problems of growth. Growth is in general a good thing, but there are problems associated with growth. There's congestion. There's actually an increase in crime, believe it or not. Because why? Because when you get growth in crime, when you get growth in population, who comes with them? Retailers. And where does crime happen? Right outside of retailers. So believe it or not, there are these unusual things that people have to deal with in moments of growth. But it's a totally different set of problems than in areas that are declining, right? In decline, you're not talking about congestion. You're talking about vacant and abandoned properties, which of course most of your students saw while they were out here. You're talking about the crime that might happen in those empty spaces where people are not looking. You're talking about, unfortunately, the people that get left behind, right? The concentration of poverty. And you're talking about school closings, because what do? You're losing population and you're losing enrollment into those schools. And of course, you're talking about food deserts. because you lose your retail, because food is retail, right? So it's this suite of problems that ensue because we know one thing, that Pigtown and all these other neighborhoods that were built for some level has now begun to decline in population, but that doesn't mean it's contracting in space, right? People leave and they don't take their homes with them. So this notion, and then of course stable, there's a couple of stable neighborhoods in this area too. Stability has problems that they need to continue to maintain and make sure that they maintain their spaces, right? That they continue to have value. Because remember, even if you want to stay stable, you have to continuously be attracting people. Because naturally somebody's going to move away, or naturally somebody's going to pass away. You need replacement. You always need replacement. So that's why, even though this is a relatively simple indicator, right, population change, keeping track of it is actually the most critical thing that most of our communities need to do, and getting in front of it. Who do you want to move in? Who's going to replace when that for sale sign goes up? Who's going to replace when somebody potentially passes away? Who do you want to be there? And how are you going to welcome them there when you get there? So let's talk about what are those differences in population decline on one side of the street or the other, because it's more than just, everybody goes this way and everybody goes that way. There's other things going on. So obviously we figured out that vacant and abandoned housing becomes what's called a threshold point. Once you start to get vacancy and you cross over a threshold, a pretty low threshold, you spiral out of control with vacancy. And this is now literally having data for the past 20 years. We can see what those threshold points are for communities. So vacant and abandoned housing, the problem with this is two different data sets. On the left side is our own housing department of community development that gives us the actual citations. This is where they have cited uninhabitable properties. That's what vacancy means here. And on the right-hand side is our State Department of State Department of Human Services, Human Resources, DHR, that provides us how many people live on temporary cash assistance. You do not have to be a GIS specialist in this room to see that there's clearly a relationship in these two maps, even though they came from two totally different governmental agencies and two totally different data sets, right?
Yes. Can you please read what we're seeing as it relates to Pigtown? It's hard to see from here.
So Pigtown this is the Washington Village Pigtown, and it looks like it's roughly in this 3.6 to 7.1 vacancy area. And you also have kind of in the middle TANF. But notice where we have the highest amount of vacancy is where we have the highest amount of TANF. Why? Because that's where they can afford to live. Unfortunately, if you think about that just like, is it a good place to be poor? Unfortunately, if you're poor in the city of Baltimore, you live amongst our worst real estate. You live amongst the most vacant and abandoned housing. So we've come up with a couple of suggestions, which obviously did not translate well into this. I was not using a map, I'm sorry. But really to make sure every neighborhood focuses in on making sure that their vacancy rate does not cross over 4%. 4% is incredibly low. We have some neighborhoods up here. This is Sandtown, Winchester, Harlem Park, which is our #1 neighborhood. It's at 35% vacancy. What's the plan to get down to 4%? Washington Village is, like we mentioned, somewhere below. This is kind of our middle areas. Washington Village we saw was kind of below 4% or heading below 4%. And on our website, we actually train communities on how to look at their data. We actually give them what's called their own community vital signs. We've been to Pigtown several times to talk to our residents here on how to read their vital signs. So every community has to focus on this. Vacancy and making sure that it remains below 4% vigilantly. Right? If anything goes vacant, you want to figure out what the plan is to get that occupied. Because remember, without occupancy, you won't get all those other things you care about, right? Making sure your schools don't close, making sure the grocery store comes. The other thing that we found out was that accessibility is a key factor to making sure that people will even want to come to your neighborhood, both in and out. If they don't even see your neighborhood, they have no way to think about even, potentially even moving in. Kind of out of sight is out of mind, and out of sight in an urban context is a killer. So making sure that there's accessibility towards the community. Again, remember this is that map of neighborhoods that grew are the ones in blue and neighborhoods clearly that MLK divide, which we've already saw, but there's just another way to see it. But why is that true from kind of an accessibility point of view? Well, this is our highway system. The red lines are our interstate highway systems that lead into and out of the city of Baltimore and into the region. And if you think about neighborhoods, right? Neighborhoods are like the muscles of the city. The transit system and the transportation system are our circulatory system. And if you have a muscle that has no access to circulation, what's going to happen? You're going to atrophy. And that's exactly what's happening pretty much on the entire western side of the city. They are literally atrophying because of lack of access to circulation. Circulation of people moving in, people even looking at those neighborhoods, having them even be eyes in their consciousness. The entire west side of Baltimore suffers from lack of just eyes on it, from an accessibility point of view. Now, obviously, this is the physical network, right? Physical access. Notice that on that west side, there is a metro line, but it's not a circulatory system, right? Our transit system is not a circulatory system. The way to get in and out of the city of Baltimore, because even if you live in Pigtown, you're going to eventually need to leave that neighborhood and you're going to eventually need to go somewhere in the region, is through, unfortunately, the highway system. That is our kind of collective circulatory system. And it isn't happening. I mean, Pigtown's actually better off than some of our more western neighborhoods, but how do we capitalize on the fact that it's right here at the mouth of 395? The way we help neighborhoods think about accessibility from kind of an actionable point of view is we really have them focus in on this 45-minute commute time. Because one of the things that you want to do in a city is that you have one of the amenities, right? And a clear urban amenity is that you have access to a job. And so all of these neighborhoods that have these high 45-minute commute times, this is Washington Village, Pigtown, which is fascinating, right? Look at the commute time here in the center of town where there's obviously a job hub. But you could walk this far in 45 minutes or less. And Sandtown Winchester is our number 2, actually, highest 45-minute commute time. This is Southern Park Heights, is our number 1 highest commute time neighborhood, which is such an irony, right? These are otherwise distressed neighborhoods, and these are the people that are working that are in these neighborhoods that have high commute times. You can see a little bit of a divide between kind of east and west MLK. But it's not so critical, it's not so terrible from this one indicator. So let's look at a couple of others. We do have a recommendation here of communities really following their 45-minute commute time, and this is why this becomes an issue from a social cohesion point of view. If you have some of your workers, so many of your workers in your neighborhood leaving for 90 minutes a day, they're not in your neighborhood, right? And these are the employed people in your neighborhood. So they're not coming to the parent-teacher conference because they're traveling so far. They're not there. You have a hard time with parental engagement. You have a hard time getting people to do the community cleanups that we need because they're traveling so far to get to work. And that should not be in the middle of a city something that's a reality, because it should be that we have easy access to jobs. We do need to do better wayfinding, especially on this western side of the city. I don't know if anybody's ever come in on Route 70 from the west. I recommend it as a field trip for anybody that wants to do it. Come in from the west on I-70. You just traveled from San Francisco, 3,000 miles, and you come to Baltimore, and there is no welcome to Baltimore sign when you get off of 70. It just says go south to Baltimore and go north to New York. But if you went straight, you actually would be on that western side of Baltimore. So what can we do with just signage and getting people to want to come into our neighborhoods? Signage is also part of design for all of you. So thinking about how to get connected, that physical aspect is only one part of that. We came up with a bunch of new indicators this round of the Vital Signs report because we knew we needed to get ways for people to really measure connectivity, right? We can talk about it, but how do we actually provide some actionable resources for connectivity? And here's why it's so important. The data is not just here to have us all look at data and learn from our past. We do want to learn from our past, but we want to use the data to try and help us predict into the future. And so this is a whole world of new urban science. Again, for those students that want to take a look at new urban science, how can you use data to predict into the future? And the reason why it's even possible to do that is because cities have what are called network effects. They have predictable features, even though it seems like chaos and it's a system and everything's interconnected, but it's because of that that there are what are called predictable network effects. And cities exhibit this, neighborhoods exhibit this, and one of the ways to just think about why this is so critical to have connectivity is because if you don't have connectivity, you're just off the network. And the difference between being on and off the network is immeasurable because there's just not access. So just to kind of give a graphic of how to think about that, if you have the internet and only 2 people have it, you've got 1 connection between 2 people. Once you get 4 users, you actually get 6 connections. And if you have 8 users, you have 28 connections, right? So the more connections you get, you actually grow your connectivity exponentially. So neighborhoods that are not connected, it's not just that the connections aren't there, it's all of the other potential connections that are missing too, that are hard to measure, but so important. And that is one of the things that you can see. Some neighborhoods that are connected get more connectivity on one side of MLK, and neighborhoods that are not connected just aren't off the network. And that is kind of how you see this complete divergence, not just by neighborhoods, this is happening by cities, right? The difference between Baltimore and DC is diverging because of the connectivity that DC has that Baltimore just doesn't even have. So it's at multiple scales, this idea of a diverging networking, that you can start to see what's happening. So, internet connectivity. Now look at the difference between East and West MLK, right? How many people have access to the internet at home? That's what this measure is. Here, it's, this is lack of internet at home. Less than 4% have lack of access to internet at home. Look it up here, up in Upton. We have areas that have more than 30% of the population does not have access to the internet at home. That's a huge divide right there. And remember, it's not just the fact that you don't have access at home, it's all of the other potential connectivity that that represents. And this is such a clear thing that's going to hit us in the 21st century if we don't fix this divide, right? And unfortunately, MLK kind of exhibits it pretty starkly. So that is, we have lots of resources if you want to go see more information about access. This is about bus ridership. This is, again, even though the highway system tends to be our means of connectivity, well, let's look at how people are getting connected on the bus system. Downtown has our highest loading and unloading, but what is going on in Central Winchester that we don't have a lot of loadings going on? Or at least recorded loadings, let's put it that way. We have a little bit of better loading here in Washington Village, Pigtown, but you can see, again, a big difference of people, and this is both getting on and off. We want people to get off in these neighborhoods too, right? That there's something to do when you get here, and again, places to welcome people. This is about capital investment, right? Connectivity to money, basically. You can see a little bit of a divide, especially up here in the northwest, Upton, Druid Heights, and of course, Sandtown. A little bit less of a difference between kind of the downtown and the Poppleton, but certainly coming down in here into South Baltimore, huge impact of investments going on. And then you can start to see how they bubble up into other kind of resources. So you can see that it's measuring this nature of connectivity is going to be, it's critical to know why these two kind of sides of MLK are diverging the way they are. I think that's my last point. So, yes?
Can you please go back to that one and again zoom in on Pigtown? Maybe compare, for example, Pigtown and what it look like.
Pigtown and which one?
Camden or someplace over there.
Over there, yeah. Well, so I can just, here is our highest capital. This one, it gets 14 million per 50. And right kind of a mile away, this is in Calgary Park, they get literally 1/100th of that, $140,000 per 50 businesses. And this is 14 million per 50 businesses. This is Harbor East. But this is Washington Village, Pigtown, and what I might do is, we have just data for this neighborhood that I can provide all of the residents in this area, the link to that specifically, and then you can see literally your neighborhood in comparison to the city and things like that. So I'll send that to Christina. This is meant to really just kind of show how Pigtown situates in the rest of the city, but we have every single one of these 55 communities has a profile. that you can download to get 100 different indicators, which I will send to you. So this is the message, right? For all of our designers and planners in the room. Not only are you designing, not only are you planning into the future, but what do you want to track to make sure that whatever you're doing has what you need for a sustainable future? You need to make sure that whatever we're building stays occupied. Inevitably, somebody's going to move out of that place for whatever reason, for good or bad reasons. What's your replacement strategy, right? How are you bringing people in and maintaining your occupancy? This is real estate 101, right? Making sure that it's accessible. Obviously, we talked a little bit about the physical accessibility, but how is it accessible to the internet? How is it accessible to mobility services? How is it accessible to capital investment? That's something that we need to think about, because if you don't have access to that, there's so many other things you won't have access to. And then, of course, about connectivity, making sure that your neighborhood remains connected, which is interesting that came up as one of the 6 principles for the Just City. So using these data to track this into the future, of once you build it, what do you do beyond that? And here's kind of the whole point of the Baltimore Neighborhood Indicators Alliance. We don't want to see diversity, we don't want to see disparity along any one of these indicators. Because if we don't even have an equal playing field at the neighborhood level, we're never going to get to equal communities and equal justice as a city. So we cannot be neighborhoods that are separate but equal. We can't. We cannot accept that some neighborhoods have such levels of distress right next to neighborhoods that are seeing so much growth. Because if we don't address that, we're not going to get to a place where we truly are an equal society. So. We can go to the next speaker, but I can also take
the 45-minute commute time, I was wondering, what is that grounded in? Because that sounds like a lot to me.
the 45-minute commute time.
Like the 45-minute commute time, like why is it 45 minutes that you look for and not half an hour or an hour or...
Oh, actually there's a whole body of research for anybody that's a transportation planner that if you commute more than 45 minutes to get to work, you're actually an unhappy person. They've actually done studies that seems to be the threshold.
45 minutes seems to be
45 minutes. We could do another 30. But 30 minutes seems to be the average for the city in general for G sign, so we did 45. Because the stark difference between 45 and 30 minutes. But it also becomes something that you can act on. If you're working on anything in one of these neighborhoods, like doing a workforce training, well, how far is your dog, right? It's something that you can talk about and actually do something about. Yes?
The neighborhood level data, do you have a raw data available or just aggregation based on?
We get as raw data as we can.